The girl sat on the edge of the old wooden bench, staring at the piano in the corner of the small school hall. Her fingers hovered over the black and white keys, trembling slightly. She had been practicing for weeks, hiding in quiet corners of her house and the school music room, determined to play the piece perfectly. Yet, the thought of the upcoming recital made her stomach twist. She had heard the whispers and the giggles. Some students openly laughed at her every attempt during practice sessions. They said she would never be good enough, that she didn't belong on a stage meant for talented performers. Even a few teachers seemed to shake their heads in doubt when they saw her pick up the sheet music. The girl felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on her small shoulders. She remembered the first time she had touched the piano at home. Her parents had been surprised. They had always encouraged her love for music, but they were cautious. The piano was old, a gift from her grandmother, with keys that sometimes stuck and notes that refused to sound clearly. Still, the girl was captivated. She would spend hours pressing keys, listening to the notes rise and fall. Her heart felt light whenever she played. Music became her secret world, a place where no one's words could hurt her. School, however, was different. Her classmates didn't understand her dedication. They only saw someone who struggled to keep up with them, someone whose hands fumbled over the keys when she tried to play simple songs. The girl remembered the cruel comments that followed her every attempt. They would snicker when she hit a wrong note, exaggerate her mistakes, and whisper, "Why does she even bother?" Each remark felt like a small stone thrown at her, making it harder to hold onto her confidence. Even though she felt hurt, the girl refused to stop. Every day after school, she would sneak into the music room when it was empty, her shoes quiet on the floor, her backpack pressed against her side. She would sit at the piano and let her fingers wander across the keys, correcting mistakes she had made, learning new melodies, and imagining the applause she wished she could hear. Sometimes she would close her eyes and picture herself standing on the stage, the spotlight warm on her face, and the audience completely captivated by her playing. In those moments, the world outside the music room, with its mocking voices, faded away. Her parents noticed the determination in her eyes. They never pressured her, never forced her to practice. Instead, they offered gentle encouragement, reminding her that the only person she needed to impress was herself. On quiet evenings, they would sit nearby as she played, listening without judgment, just letting the music fill the room. Their presence gave her strength, a quiet reminder that she was not alone in her struggle. The day of the recital arrived, and the girl felt her nerves twist tighter than ever. She had dressed carefully, choosing a simple dress that made her feel comfortable yet confident. Her shoes tapped lightly against the floor as she waited backstage. She could hear the chatter of other students and the occasional clapping of parents and teachers. The noise made her heart race. She could feel the tension in her hands, the slight tremor that always came when she was about to perform. She reminded herself to breathe slowly in and out, focusing on the music that had always been her refuge. When her name was called, a hush fell over the hall. The girl walked onto the stage, her steps hesitant but determined. The bright lights made her squint, and she could feel dozens of eyes on her. She noticed some familiar faces in the crowd, classmates who had mocked her so many times. Their expressions were skeptical, almost expecting her to fail. The girl took a deep breath and approached the piano. She sat down on the bench, adjusted the sheet music, and rested her fingers lightly on the keys. Her heart pounded, but she reminded herself that she had practiced for this moment countless times. She began to play. At first, the notes were quiet, almost timid, as if she were testing the waters. She felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease as she settled into the rhythm she had worked so hard to master. The music flowed slowly at first, each note carefully placed, each chord deliberate. She felt the melody building beneath her fingers, and with each measure, her confidence grew. The sound filled the hall, weaving around the rows of chairs, touching ears that had never truly listened to her before. Some students shifted in their seats, uncertain at first. Others leaned forward, surprised by the clarity and emotion in her playing. The girl had never felt anything like this before. The music was no longer just notes on a page. It had become a voice, telling a story she had kept locked inside. She could see the audience beginning to react, the skeptical looks softening into curiosity. A few parents smiled, nodding along to the melody, recognizing the passion and effort behind each movement of her hands. Her fingers danced over the keys, confident now, as if the piano had become an extension of herself. She poured every ounce of feeling she had into the performance, letting the music carry her beyond the doubts and ridicule. The hall seemed to fade away, leaving only her and the piano, the notes resonating in perfect harmony with her heartbeat. The girl realized that this moment was hers, a victory over every whisper, every laugh, and every shadow of doubt. When the final note lingered in the air, silence enveloped the room for a heartbeat before the applause erupted. The girl's chest swelled with a mixture of relief and pride. She had done it. She had faced the mockery, the doubt, and the fear, and she had emerged triumphant. The audience's reaction was more than she had imagined. They were astonished, captivated, moved. Even the students who had laughed before were clapping, their expressions a mixture of surprise and respect. The girl stood, her hands still trembling slightly, and bowed. She felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that she had proven to herself that perseverance and passion could overcome even the harshest judgment. She had shown that dedication and belief in one's own abilities could turn ridicule into admiration. As she stepped off the stage, her heart still racing, she knew this was just the beginning of her journey. Music would always be her refuge, her voice, and her triumph. And now, the world, or at least her small corner of it, had to take notice. After the recital, the girl returned home with a mix of excitement and exhaustion. She placed her small bag on the floor and sank into the chair near the window, her fingers still tingling from the piano keys. The memory of the applause lingered in her mind, making her smile softly. For the first time, she realized that the hours of secret practice had not been in vain. But even with the small victory, she knew the real journey was far from over. There were pieces she still wanted to master, melodies she wanted to learn, and the dream of performing on bigger stages one day. Her mornings became filled with quiet discipline. She would wake early, even before the sun peeked over the rooftops, and sit at the piano in the empty house. The world outside was still dark, and the silence allowed her to focus entirely on her music. Sometimes she would close her eyes and imagine herself on a grand stage, the audience waiting in anticipation. Other times, she would repeat the same passages again and again, perfecting every note, correcting every slight mistake. There was a rhythm to her days now, a gentle pulse that connected her heart to the keys. Despite her dedication, the shadow of doubt lingered. She still remembered the whispers of classmates, the laughter when she made mistakes. Even though some people had applauded, others had not changed their opinions. There were still moments when she felt small and unsure, but in these moments, she reminded herself that music was her own journey. She did not play to please others. She played to express what words could not convey. Slowly, she began to understand that self-belief was stronger than any voice of criticism. One afternoon, while she was practicing a particularly difficult piece, her mentor came to visit. The mentor was an older figure, someone who had seen the girl struggle and grow from the very beginning. They sat quietly in the corner, listening to the music unfold. When the girl finished, the mentor clapped softly and smiled. "You have something special," they said. "The more you play, the more you discover yourself in the music. Keep pushing, even when it feels hard. Every mistake is a step forward." Those words stuck with her. She realized that the journey was not about perfection. It was about persistence and growth. Each note she played, whether right or wrong, was part of her story. With renewed energy, she continued her practice, tackling pieces that had once seemed impossible. Her fingers became more confident, her posture more natural, and her connection to the music deeper. She discovered the joy of expressing emotion through sound, letting each melody carry a fragment of her own heart. School life continued as before, with its mix of encouragement and challenges. Some classmates still teased, but the girl found that their words no longer held power over her. She had grown stronger, not because they had changed, but because she had learned to believe in herself. Teachers who had doubted her began to notice the improvement in her technique and the emotion in her playing. Occasionally, they would nod in approval or offer a small word of praise. These gestures were not the reason she played, but they reminded her that her efforts were being seen. Her parents remained her quiet support system. They never interfered, never pressured her, but always provided a safe space for her to grow. Evenings at home became a sanctuary. She would play while they listened in the background, their gentle smiles encouraging her without a single spoken word. Sometimes, her parents would hum along to the melodies, creating a small, private concert that filled the house with warmth. It was in these moments that she truly felt the power of music, its ability to connect hearts and soothe the soul. As the months passed, the girl began to challenge herself in new ways. She experimented with different styles, exploring the emotions that various pieces could evoke. Some were bright and cheerful, others deep and haunting. She discovered that the piano could speak in many voices, and each voice revealed a different part of herself. She kept a journal alongside her practice, noting down the feelings each piece brought out, the small victories and the moments of struggle. The journal became a map of her journey, a record of how far she had come and how much further she wished to go. Opportunities to perform began to appear. Small gatherings at school, community events, and family celebrations became stages where she could share her music. Each performance brought new lessons: how to calm her nerves, how to engage an audience, and how to let go of fear. She learned that music was not just about playing the right notes, but about creating an experience that touched others. The reactions of listeners, from smiles to tears, became her compass, guiding her toward deeper expression. One day, her mentor suggested a particularly challenging composition, a piece known for its intricate rhythm and emotional depth. At first, the girl felt intimidated. The sheet music looked like a tangle of lines and notes, each one demanding attention. But she remembered the words of her mentor: every mistake is a step forward. She approached the piece slowly, breaking it into sections, practicing each part until her fingers memorized the movement. Hours turned into days, days into weeks, and gradually, the complex piece began to make sense under her hands. She felt a thrill of accomplishment with every successful run, a quiet pride that pushed her to continue. Through it all, she never lost sight of why she played. The music was her voice, her way of telling stories that words could not. It was a refuge from a world that could sometimes be cruel, a place where she was free to explore and express herself. Her journey was not easy, and it was not without doubt, but with every practice session, every performance, and every small victory, she grew more certain of her path. Her confidence began to radiate in subtle ways. She walked a little taller, spoke a little more clearly, and carried herself with a quiet assurance. When she played, it was no longer just about her own satisfaction. It was about sharing something meaningful with others. People began to notice the change, the way she could draw emotion from a simple piano melody, and respect followed naturally. Those who had once mocked her could not help but be impressed by the dedication and heart behind her playing. Evenings became a time of reflection. The girl would sit by her window after practice, watching the world outside, thinking about the progress she had made. She understood that success was not immediate and that growth required patience and resilience. The journey of a musician was long and often lonely, but it was also rich and rewarding. She felt grateful for the support she had, the mentors who guided her, and the music that had become a constant companion in her life. And so, the girl continued to practice, to learn, and to grow. She embraced every challenge, faced every doubt, and celebrated every triumph, no matter how small. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a part of her, a mirror reflecting her determination, her heart, and her dreams. As she looked toward the future, she knew that each note she played was a step forward, a story waiting to be told, and it promised that she was capable of far more than anyone had ever imagined. The day of the next recital arrived with a mixture of excitement and nerves that twisted in the girl's stomach. She woke early, sunlight spilling through the curtains, and immediately went to the piano. Her fingers ran lightly over the keys, rehearsing the piece she had worked on for weeks. Each note reminded her of the countless hours she had spent alone, perfecting every measure, every chord, every nuance. She paused for a moment and closed her eyes, letting the music fill the room and calm her anxious heart. At school, the hall was buzzing with activity. Students were arriving, their laughter and chatter echoing off the walls. She carried her small bag with her music sheets carefully tucked inside, trying to focus on the familiar rhythm of her breathing rather than the noise around her. Despite the progress she had made, she could not completely erase the memory of past mockery. A few classmates glanced at her, whispering, and she noticed the faint smirk on some faces. It stung, but it no longer had the power to stop her. She had learned that her music was her own, and she would let it speak for itself backstage. She found a quiet corner to settle in before her turn. She arranged her sheet music, adjusted her posture, and ran her fingers lightly over the keys of the piano nearby. Every small movement reminded her that she was ready. She remembered the encouraging words of her mentor and her parents, the long evenings of practice, and the joy she had found in learning each piece. These thoughts steadied her, helping her replace fear with focus. When her name was called, the girl took a deep breath and walked toward the stage. The bright lights made her blink, and the audience looked vast and intimidating. She could see some familiar faces, including students who had doubted her before, as well as parents, teachers, and friends waiting to hear her play. She approached the piano with determination, placed her hands on the keys, and sat down. Her heart raced, but she let the rhythm of her breathing guide her. The first few notes were soft, cautious, almost hesitant, but as she continued, her confidence grew. The piece was challenging, filled with rapid sequences and delicate pauses that demanded precision and emotion. She had practiced each section countless times, yet performing it in front of an audience added a new layer of pressure. She focused on each note, letting her fingers move naturally across the keys. The music flowed from her heart, not just from her memory. Every chord carried the story of her struggle, her perseverance, and the joy she had found in the piano. The hall seemed to fade away, leaving only her and the music. As the performance continued, she noticed the audience's reaction changing. The skeptical faces softened, eyes widened in surprise, and some leaned forward. Captivated by the sound, the girl's nerves began to dissolve, replaced by a growing sense of connection with the listeners. She realized that the music was no longer just a personal challenge. It was a bridge between her and everyone watching. She could feel the emotion traveling from her hands to the crowd, a silent conversation of notes and melodies that spoke louder than words ever could. She remembered the times she had been mocked, the moments of doubt, and the days of endless practice, and she felt a quiet triumph. Each note she played was a declaration that she had persevered, that her love for music had carried her through challenges that once seemed insurmountable. The audience's astonishment fueled her, giving her energy and courage to continue. She played with a freedom and expressiveness that she had not experienced before, allowing herself to fully inhabit the music. Midway through the piece, a particularly difficult passage approached. It required rapid finger movement, careful timing, and intense focus. She felt a brief flicker of nervousness, but she reminded herself of all the hours she had spent practicing this exact moment. Her fingers danced across the keys with precision and grace. The notes rang out clearly, each one a testament to her dedication and determination. The audience, now completely absorbed, listened in awe. Some eyes glistened with tears, moved by the emotion she conveyed through the piano. With each measure, she gained more control over her nerves. She allowed herself to feel the music, to let it guide her rather than resist the pressure. She played the soft passages with delicate care and the powerful sections with strength and passion. The contrast in dynamics, the flow of emotion, and the clarity of her technique created a performance that was both technically impressive and deeply touching. She could see that her music was resonating with the audience, and that realization filled her with a quiet joy. As the final measures approached, she felt a sense of culmination. Every note, every phrase, every emotion led to this moment. She played the concluding chords with confidence, letting them linger in the air. The last note faded into silence, and for a brief heartbeat, there was nothing but stillness. Then, the applause began. It started softly, then grew into a steady wave of clapping, cheering, and expressions of admiration. The girl's heart soared as she looked at the audience, seeing their astonishment and appreciation. Even those who had once doubted her were now clapping sincerely, some with smiles of surprise. She rose from the piano bench, hands slightly trembling, and bowed. The applause continued, and she felt tears prick her eyes. It was not sadness but a mixture of relief, pride, and happiness. She had faced her fear and the mockery of others, and she had succeeded. The music that had been her refuge, her teacher, and her voice had carried her through the moment. She understood that her journey was not just about performing. It was about growth, self-belief, and the courage to keep moving forward despite doubt. Backstage, she received quiet congratulations from a few teachers and the gentle smiles of her parents. Her mentor approached, eyes shining with pride. "You have grown so much," they said, "not just in skill, but in spirit. The way you let the music speak is remarkable. Never forget this feeling." The girl nodded, feeling a warmth that spread through her entire body. She realized that her dedication had paid off, not because she had sought recognition, but because she had committed herself fully to something she loved. That night, as she returned home, she sat at her own piano in the quiet of her room. She played the piece once more, not for an audience, not for applause, but for herself. Every note reminded her of the journey, the struggle, and the growth she had experienced. She played with a sense of freedom and joy that she had never felt before. Knowing that music had become an inseparable part of her life, she reflected on the day, the emotions of the stage, and the connection she had felt with the audience. It was more than just a performance. It was a step forward, a milestone in her journey of perseverance and passion. The girl understood that each performance was a lesson. There would always be challenges, moments of doubt, and new pieces to master. But the courage she had found on stage, the ability to transform fear into expression, and the power of music to communicate beyond words had changed her forever. She felt a sense of readiness for whatever lay ahead, knowing that as long as she held onto her dedication and love for music, she could face any stage, any audience, and any challenge with confidence. In the days that followed, she continued her practice with renewed energy. She explored new compositions, challenged herself with more complex pieces, and experimented with emotions in her playing. Each session was an opportunity to grow, to discover something new about herself, and to deepen her connection with the music. She knew that the journey was ongoing, but the triumph she had experienced on stage remained a source of strength and inspiration. The experience of that recital became a turning point. It was no longer just about being judged or overcoming mockery. It was about expressing herself fully, sharing her heart through the piano, and embracing the joy and challenge of her passion. She had learned that true success was not measured by applause alone, but by the courage to continue, the dedication to improve, and the willingness to let music reveal her soul. And with that understanding, she faced every new day, every new piece, and every new audience with a quiet confidence that came from within. The anticipation in the hall was thick as the girl waited for her turn. This performance was different. It was not just another recital but an important showcase, one where she could demonstrate all the growth and skill she had achieved. The lights above were warm and bright, casting a soft glow across the stage, and the audience was a mix of familiar faces and new observers, all waiting to see what she could do. She felt the familiar flutter in her stomach, a mixture of nerves and excitement, but she focused on her breathing, letting the calm of her preparation guide her. As she walked onto the stage, she noticed the soft murmur of the crowd. Some faces were curious, some skeptical, and some filled with anticipation. The girl approached the piano and settled onto the bench, adjusting the sheet music with care. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, feeling the texture, the coolness beneath her fingers. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, recalling every hour of practice, every struggle she had faced, and every small victory that had led her here. She was ready. The first notes were delicate, almost whispering, as she tested the sound and felt the space around her. Slowly, she let the music grow, each note deliberate and full of emotion. The melody carried a story of persistence, of quiet determination, and of the joy she found in the piano. The hall seemed to hush, the audience drawn into the unfolding music. Even those who had doubted her were silent, their eyes following her hands as they moved gracefully over the keys. The girl felt a sense of flow as she progressed through the piece. She was no longer just playing, she was communicating. Each chord, each pause, each variation in tempo conveyed her emotions, her experiences, and her journey. The music became a bridge between her heart and the listeners, and she could feel their attention, their surprise, and their awe. She remembered the teasing from her classmates, the moments when she had been laughed at, and she let those memories fuel her determination. Every note was a response, a quiet assertion of her perseverance. As the performance continued, the piece became more complex. Rapid sequences of notes required her full concentration, demanding precision and control. She felt the pressure, but instead of fear, it drove her focus. Her fingers moved with confidence, dancing across the keys with skill and grace. She allowed herself to feel the music deeply, letting her emotions guide the expression of every chord. The audience was captivated, leaning forward, absorbed in the sound that seemed to fill the entire hall. Midway, there was a passage of intense emotion, a section that required both power and delicacy. The girl's hands moved swiftly yet lightly, creating a contrast that drew the listeners in. She could see the expressions on their faces change: astonishment, admiration, and even a few teary eyes. Her music was touching them, resonating in a way that went beyond the technical skill. The performance was no longer just a recital. It had become an experience, an emotional journey shared between her and the audience. She played with an intensity that surprised even herself. The hours of practice, the private sessions, the quiet evenings of concentration all merged into this moment. Her fingers glided effortlessly over the keys, her posture strong yet relaxed, and her heart beat in rhythm with the music. She was fully present, every note a reflection of her passion and dedication. The hall was silent except for the music, and in that silence, she felt the connection she had always hoped for, an unspoken understanding between performer and listener. As she reached the final section of the piece, The music soared. The notes became more powerful, more expressive, carrying the culmination of the story she had been telling. She allowed herself to pour every ounce of feeling into the piano, letting the crescendo build and then gently resolve. The audience was completely absorbed, some leaning forward, some closing their eyes, all held in the spell of her performance. She could sense the astonishment in their reactions, a recognition of the talent, effort, and heart behind each note. The final chord rang out, lingering in the air, and for a brief moment, the hall was completely silent. Then, as if released from a spell, the applause began. It started quietly, then grew into a wave of clapping, cheers, and expressions of admiration. The girl's chest swelled with emotion. She had done it. She had faced the doubt, the fear, and the past mockery, and she had emerged victorious. The music had spoken, and the audience had listened, moved, and celebrated her talent. Standing, she took a deep bow, feeling the warmth of the moment wash over her. Tears threatened to fall, but she smiled instead, feeling a sense of quiet triumph. The applause continued, echoing in the hall, a reflection of the astonishment and respect she had earned. Even those who had doubted her before were clapping sincerely, their expressions softened with admiration. She realized that this moment was not just about recognition. It was about the journey she had taken to reach this point, the resilience she had built, and the passion that had never wavered. Backstage, her mentor and parents greeted her with smiles and quiet congratulations. Her mentor's eyes shone with pride. "You have outdone yourself," they said. "The way you let the music speak, the courage and expression you showed, it is remarkable. This is only the beginning. Never stop sharing your gift." The girl nodded, feeling a warmth and sense of accomplishment that was both humbling and inspiring. She understood that the applause was not the end, but a marker of how far she had come and a sign of the possibilities ahead. Later, alone in her room, she returned to the piano. She played the piece again, slowly this time, savoring each note, each chord, each emotion. She reflected on the performance, the connection with the audience, and the astonishment she had witnessed in their faces. It was a moment she would carry with her forever, a reminder of the power of persistence, passion, and belief in oneself. She knew that the journey would continue, with new challenges, new pieces, and new stages. But she was ready. The music was now an inseparable part of her, a voice that could convey all she had experienced and all she hoped to share. As she played, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The music had allowed her to rise above mockery, to find strength in herself, and to connect with others in a meaningful way. She realized that true success was not measured by applause alone, but by the courage to continue, the willingness to grow, and the heart poured into every note. She had experienced astonishment from others, but the greatest astonishment was within herself, the realization that she had become the musician she had always hoped to be. And with that, she knew that each performance from now on would be a celebration of her journey, her music, and the unbreakable spirit that had brought her here. The girl left the stage feeling a mixture of relief and exhilaration. The applause had been overwhelming, and though she had felt the nerves earlier, the moment had passed in a blur of music, emotion, and connection. Backstage, she was greeted with quiet smiles from teachers, warm hugs from her parents, and a nod of approval from her mentor. Each acknowledgement, though simple, reinforced the journey she had undertaken, the countless hours of practice, the moments of doubt, the mockery she had once faced, and the determination that had kept her moving forward. As the evening progressed, she had time to reflect on what had just happened. She found a quiet corner, away from the crowd, and allowed herself to feel the full impact of the performance. It was not just about the applause or recognition, though they were gratifying. It was about the courage she had discovered within herself, the resilience that had grown stronger through every challenge, and the joy of sharing her music with others. She realized that her passion had carried her through every obstacle, transforming doubt and fear into confidence and expression. Her parents approached her, eyes filled with pride. "You have grown so much," they said softly, "not just as a musician, but as a person. You faced everything with courage and dedication, and it shows in your music." She smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Their words were comforting, but the true affirmation came from within, from the knowledge that she had faced her fears and succeeded on her own terms. Her mentor lingered nearby, offering quiet encouragement. "Remember this feeling," they said. "This is what comes from dedication and passion. Music is more than notes. It is your voice, your story, and your heart. Never forget that, no matter where your journey takes you." The girl nodded, absorbing the wisdom, understanding that the recognition she had received was a milestone, not an endpoint. There was still so much to learn, to explore, and to express. The following days were filled with reflection and small celebrations. Friends and family who had witnessed the performance reached out with kind words and congratulations. She felt grateful, not for the praise alone, but for the support and encouragement that had surrounded her along the way. She knew that she had been given opportunities that many never received the chance to practice in peace, the guidance of mentors, and the love of those who believed in her. These were gifts that had nurtured her talent and fueled her growth. Despite the attention, she remained grounded. She continued her daily practice, approaching each session with renewed focus and curiosity. Every piece she learned, every note she played, was a step forward, a chance to deepen her understanding and expression. She explored new styles, experimented with emotion and tempo, and challenged herself with increasingly complex compositions. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It had become a companion, a teacher, and a mirror reflecting her determination, heart, and growth. School continued as before, but her presence had changed. There was a quiet respect from peers who had once doubted her, a recognition of her talent and perseverance. The girl, however, did not let this shift define her. She remained focused on her music, understanding that the journey was personal and ongoing. She offered encouragement to others, sharing her experiences and showing that dedication and passion could overcome obstacles. Her journey had taught her empathy, patience, and the value of quiet perseverance. Opportunities to perform grew, and with each performance, she learned more about herself and her craft. She discovered the nuances of connecting with different audiences, understanding how music could evoke emotions and create shared experiences. She began to see music not just as an achievement or display of skill, but as a language, a means of communication that transcended words and bridged hearts. Each recital, no matter how small, became a learning experience, a chance to refine her expression and grow in confidence. One day, she received an invitation to perform at a larger event, a venue she had only dreamed of. The thought was exhilarating, but also daunting. She felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but she remembered her journey, the hours of practice, the overcoming of mockery, the lessons from mentors, and the support from her family. She realized that each step she had taken had prepared her for moments like this. With determination and calm, she accepted the challenge, ready to embrace the next stage of her musical journey. In the quiet moments at home, she continued to play, exploring compositions that challenged her in new ways. She experimented with dynamics, expression, and tempo, learning how to convey emotion through subtle variations in touch and rhythm. Her journal, filled with notes on practice, reflections, and emotions, became a map of her growth. She revisited earlier pieces, recognizing how much she had improved, and looked forward to future challenges with a sense of curiosity and excitement. Her perspective had shifted. She no longer saw mistakes as failures, but as opportunities to learn and improve. She understood that growth required patience, persistence, and self-compassion. The journey of a musician, she realized, was ongoing, filled with highs and lows, triumphs and setbacks. What mattered most was the dedication to continue, the willingness to embrace challenges, and the passion to keep expressing oneself through music. Evenings became a time of reflection and gratitude. She would sit at her piano, play quietly, and think about how far she had come. She remembered the teasing, the doubts, the moments when she had questioned her abilities, and she realized how much strength she had gained from those experiences. Music had been her refuge, her teacher, and her voice. It had allowed her to rise above mockery, to find courage within herself, and to connect with others in a meaningful way. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her journey was as important as her achievements. The girl understood that recognition, while meaningful, was not the ultimate goal. The true reward was the growth, the learning, and the joy of creating and sharing music. She had discovered that perseverance, passion, and belief in oneself could overcome doubt and criticism. Her journey had become an example, showing that anyone who commits to their dreams with heart and determination can achieve remarkable things. As time passed, she continued to perform, practice, and grow. Each performance was a chance to express herself, to share her story, and to connect with audiences in new ways. She learned to balance technical skill with emotional expression, finding the harmony that made her music resonate. Her journey was ongoing, but she faced each day with confidence, curiosity, and gratitude. Looking back, she realized that the most important lesson was not about perfection or recognition, but about courage, dedication, and passion. She had faced mockery, doubt, and fear, and emerged stronger and more confident. Music had become a lifelong companion, a source of joy, and a way to communicate beyond words. And she knew that as long as she remained true to herself and her love for music, the journey would continue, filled with discovery, expression, and fulfillment. The girl smiled as she played her final notes of the evening. She had come far, yet she knew this was just the beginning. Every note she played, every melody she explored, and every performance she gave was part of a larger story, her story, a story of perseverance, passion, and the unshakable belief that she could achieve her dreams. She felt a quiet contentment, knowing that music had transformed her life, and that the path ahead was full of possibilities waiting to be explored.